The Vaeltharan Dominion had elevated the art of public execution to something approaching high culture, which said rather more about their society than they probably intended. Their capital world of Corthac Prime boasted the galaxy's most sophisticated entertainment complex, a sprawling monument to organized violence that could accommodate 3 billion spectators and broadcast to every corner of known space. The Dominion's philosophers liked to call it participatory justice, though most reasonable beings would have settled for expensive sadism with better camera work. The trial by spectacle had been a cornerstone of Vaeltharan civilization for over 2 millennia, combining their species' natural flair for dramatic presentation with their unfortunate tendency to solve diplomatic problems through creative murder. What had started as simple gladiatorial combat had evolved into elaborate theatrical productions, complete with orchestral accompaniment, holographic special effects, and merchandising opportunities that would make a corporate raider weep with envy. Today's featured presentation promised to be their masterpiece. General Thorne Blackwood sat in his containment cell, methodically polishing his regulation combat boots, with the sort of attention to detail that suggested either obsessive-compulsive disorder or the calm that comes from knowing something everyone else doesn't. Admiral Vera Nightshade occupied the adjacent cell, reviewing what appeared to be technical manuals with the focused intensity of someone cramming for an exam. General Knox Ironside had claimed the third cell and spent most of his time doing push-ups and humming what sounded suspiciously like drinking songs. The Vaeltharan guards found their behavior deeply unsettling. Most condemned prisoners spent their final days in various states of psychological collapse, which provided excellent dramatic material for the pre-execution documentary specials. These 3 humans displayed the sort of professional composure usually associated with people who were late for a business meeting rather than an appointment with molecular disintegration. Chancellor Vextar Corthane, the Dominion's supreme leader and self-appointed master of ceremonies, reviewed the execution schedule with the satisfaction of someone who genuinely believed they were about to solve all their species' problems with a bit of well-choreographed violence. The human insurgency had been a persistent irritation for the better part of 15 standard years, disrupting trade routes and liberating systems with the sort of methodical efficiency that suggested uncomfortably advanced strategic thinking. The humans had been categorized as a developing nuisance species in official Dominion documentation, ranking somewhere between space pirates and administrative paperwork in terms of long-term threat assessment. Their homeworld was unremarkable, their technology appeared to be cobbled together from salvaged components, and their military doctrine seemed to consist primarily of what the Dominion's strategic analysts had dismissed as organized improvisation. The fact that this organized improvisation had somehow managed to cost the Dominion 47 star systems and roughly 300 billion credits in military expenditure was generally omitted from public briefings. The day of the execution dawned with the sort of artificial perfection that only came from having complete control over planetary weather systems. Atmospheric processors had been calibrated for optimal visibility, gravitational dampeners had been adjusted to enhance the dramatic effect of the molecular dissolution chambers, and every media network in the galaxy had purchased broadcasting rights at prices that would have funded small wars. This was going to be the most watched execution in galactic history, and the Dominion intended to extract every possible moment of entertainment value from it. Trillions of beings across thousands of worlds prepared to witness what the promotional materials were calling the final chapter of human resistance. The crystalline entities projected the feed directly into their living structures. The gas giants' floating cities dedicated their primary display arrays to the broadcast. Even the notoriously reclusive quantum monks emerged from their dimensional meditation chambers to observe what promised to be a defining moment in galactic politics. The 3 human prisoners were escorted to the execution platform through a corridor lined with representatives from every major species in the Dominion. This was theater on a scale that would have impressed ancient Rome, assuming ancient Rome had possessed faster-than-light communication and a budget that could have purchased several solar systems. The Imperial Death Symphony began playing their signature composition, a piece specifically written for executions that managed to be both mournfully beautiful and vaguely threatening. Holographic displays showed the faces of the condemned in high-definition detail, allowing viewers across the galaxy to observe every nuance of their final moments. General Blackwood stepped up to his designated execution position with the measured pace of someone reviewing troops rather than facing annihilation. Admiral Nightshade actually took a moment to adjust her uniform before taking her place, as if preparing for a formal inspection. General Ironside surveyed the crowd with the sort of professional interest usually reserved for tactical assessments, nodding approvingly at the security arrangements. Chancellor Corthane delivered his opening address, a carefully crafted piece of political theatre designed to demonstrate the Dominion's moral authority and inevitable victory over chaos. He spoke of the burden of leadership, the necessity of maintaining galactic stability, and the regrettable but essential nature of decisive action against those who would challenge the natural order. The crowd was appropriately impressed. The media declared it a masterpiece of statecraft. The betting pools on various worlds adjusted their odds on whether any of the humans would break down and plead for clemency before the end. They would have better luck betting on the laws of physics suddenly becoming optional. When offered the traditional opportunity for final statements, General Blackwood looked directly into the primary broadcast camera and said, "My compliments to whoever coordinated this event. The timing couldn't have been more perfect." Admiral Nightshade smiled pleasantly and remarked, "I do hope everyone's been paying attention to the technical specifications of your broadcast network. It's been quite educational." General Ironside simply grinned and announced, "Thanks for the Galaxy Wayback Communication Channel, gentlemen. We'll be putting it to good use." The Chancellor dismissed these final words as the desperate bravado of condemned criminals facing the inevitable. The crowd interpreted them as pathetic attempts to maintain dignity in the face of certain death. The commentators noted the humans' apparent inability to grasp the reality of their situation. No one seemed particularly interested in what exactly the humans meant about broadcast networks and communication channels. The execution itself proceeded with all the theatrical grandeur the Dominion had promised. The molecular dissolution chambers functioned flawlessly, the ceremonial death rays performed according to specifications, and the three human military leaders ceased to exist in a manner that was both dramatically satisfying and scientifically thorough. The crowd cheered with the sort of enthusiastic approval usually reserved for particularly impressive sporting events. The Chancellor delivered his closing remarks about the restoration of proper galactic order. The media proclaimed it a triumph of Dominion justice and administrative efficiency. The after-party lasted for 3 standard days. For approximately 96 hours, the galaxy basked in the warm glow of a problem definitively solved. Dominion security forces reported a dramatic decrease in insurgent activity. Financial markets responded positively to the stability dividend. The Chancellor was nominated for the Galactic Peace Prize by 17 different species councils. Someone even commissioned a commemorative sculpture garden, which proved surprisingly popular with tourists. Then the reports began arriving from the outer territories. The first indication of trouble came from the remote monitoring station at grid reference Theta 7, a facility so isolated and unimportant that its primary function was serving as a career dead end for communications officers who had somehow annoyed their superiors. The duty operator, a junior technician whose greatest professional achievement had been successfully calibrating a sensor array without destroying it, detected what appeared to be massive coordinated fleet movements in sectors that were supposed to be empty space. Since these fleet movements were accompanied by transmissions in English, and since everyone knew that the human military leadership had just been publicly dissolved on live television, the obvious explanation was a catastrophic equipment malfunction. The second indication came 12 hours later, when the Dominion supply convoy bound for the contested Proxima system simply vanished from tracking screens. No distress signals, no debris patterns, no explanation that made sense within the context of known physics. One moment the convoy was maintaining proper formation and transmitting routine status updates, the next moment it had apparently ceased to exist, leaving behind only empty space and a growing sense of unease among the escort fleet commanders. The third indication came when border patrol stations throughout the contested frontier began reporting massive human fleet movements. ships appearing in formations that shouldn't have been possible given the Dominion's intelligence estimates of remaining human naval capacity. Coordinated attacks on Dominion supply lines that demonstrated a level of strategic sophistication that was supposed to have died with the 3 executed generals. The fourth indication came when someone in the Dominion intelligence service finally decided to investigate exactly what had been happening in the outer territories while the entire galaxy was focused on the execution broadcast. The results of this investigation were, to put it mildly, educational. 27 Dominion patrol bases had been systematically destroyed. 41 supply convoys had been captured or eliminated. 11 entire star systems had been severed from the Dominion communication network. 8 major industrial facilities had been seized by human forces, and all of this had occurred during the precise time period when trillions of beings across the galaxy were watching 3 human leaders die in the most elaborate execution ceremony in recorded history. The coincidence was remarkable, almost as if the entire execution had been carefully orchestrated to provide the perfect distraction for the largest human military operation of the war. Chancellor Vaeltharan received the intelligence briefing in his private chambers, still wearing his ceremonial execution robes, and still glowing with what he had believed to be the satisfaction of a job well done. The expression on his face progressed through several distinct phases as he absorbed the implications of the report, starting with confusion, advancing through disbelief, and eventually settling into the sort of existential horror usually reserved for particularly unpleasant philosophical revelations. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his intelligence chief, a capable but unimaginative functionary who had built his career on providing his superiors with information that confirmed their existing beliefs. "We eliminated their command structure, we verified their identities through genetic analysis, we broadcast their deaths to the entire galaxy." The intelligence chief, whose career was rapidly transitioning from promising to catastrophic, cleared his throat with the nervous energy of someone delivering news that might result in his own appointment with the molecular dissolution chambers. "It appears, Chancellor, that we may have been operating under certain fundamental misconceptions regarding the actual structure of human military command." "Misconceptions? The individuals we executed appear to have been volunteers, sir. Actors. The real human military leadership was never captured, and has apparently been using our execution broadcasts as cover for the most extensive strategic operation in the war's history." The silence that followed this revelation possessed the quality of a small star undergoing gravitational collapse. Chancellor Vaeltharan's facial tentacles went through a series of color changes that would have been fascinating to xenobiologists and absolutely terrifying to anyone who had to deliver bad news to him on a regular basis. The scope of the deception was breathtaking in its audacity and precision. The 3 humans had volunteered for certain death, not as a desperate final gesture, but as a carefully calculated strategic sacrifice, designed to provide perfect cover for the most ambitious human military operation of the entire conflict. While the galaxy's attention was riveted on the execution spectacle, human forces had been systematically dismantling Dominion positions across a front spanning dozens of star systems. The betting pools that had been taking odds on when the humans would break down and beg for mercy suddenly seemed remarkably prescient, though not in the way anyone had expected. The humans hadn't begged for mercy because they didn't need it. They had been holding all the tactical advantages from the beginning, and the Dominion had provided them with the perfect opportunity to use them. The real human leadership, it was discovered, consisted of individuals with names like Fleet Admiral Raven Steele, General Mason Grimm, and Admiral Phoenix Vale. Names that appeared in no Dominion intelligence files. Leaders who had been planning this operation for months, while the Dominion's attention was focused on hunting the 3 volunteers who had deliberately allowed themselves to be captured. The human counterattack, when it finally became visible, was everything the Dominion's military analysts had insisted was theoretically impossible. It was coordinated across multiple sectors, executed with surgical precision, and demonstrated a level of strategic sophistication that made the Dominion's own planning look like amateur hour at a military academy. Human forces struck Dominion communication networks, supply infrastructure, and command centers with the sort of methodical efficiency that suggested they had been studying Dominion tactical doctrine for years and had developed specific countermeasures for every standard operating procedure, which, as subsequent investigation revealed, was exactly what they had been doing. The Chancellor discovered this uncomfortable truth when the human fleet arrived at Korthak Prime exactly 96 hours after the execution, not to occupy the planet or demand surrender, but to deliver a message. A single transmission, broadcast on all frequencies, delivered by a woman who identified herself as Fleet Admiral Raven Steele. "Greetings, Chancellor Korthane," the message began, with the sort of professional courtesy that somehow managed to be more unsettling than outright hostility. "We thought you might be interested to know that Generals Blackwood, Nightshade and Ironside asked us to convey their gratitude for the excellent distraction you provided. The galaxy-wide broadcast network worked exactly as they had hoped it would." The Chancellor's tentacles achieved several new colors that had previously been unknown to Vaeltharan biology. "We also wanted to inform you," Admiral Steele continued, "that the outer territory operations you've been reading about in your intelligence reports represent only the opening phase of our strategic response to your theatrical presentation. We have taken the liberty of liberating 23 additional star systems, capturing 67 Dominion vessels, and establishing new supply lines that should prove quite useful for our expanded operations." The Admiral paused, and the Chancellor was certain he could detect genuine amusement in her voice. "And Chancellor, the next time you decide to execute human military officers on galaxy-wide television, you might want to make sure they're actually military officers. General Blackwood was a retired theater director, Admiral Nightshade taught engineering at a civilian university, General Ironside ran a military history museum. Brave people certainly, and they'll be remembered as heroes, but the actual human military command has been rather busy while you were planning your little show." The transmission ended, and the human fleet departed, leaving behind a galaxy that suddenly viewed the Vaeltharan Dominion very differently than it had a week earlier. The empire that had claimed to solve the human problem with elaborate public theater had instead provided the humans with perfect cover for the most successful military operation in their species' recorded history. The betting pools, it turned out, had been asking entirely the wrong questions. The real question hadn't been when the humans would break, but when the Dominion would realize it had been comprehensively outmaneuvered by a species it had dismissed as organizationally primitive. Chancellor Korthane spent the following months dealing with the political fallout of what the galactic media had begun calling the Great Deception. Dominion allies questioned the Empire's intelligence capabilities and strategic competence. Neutral systems reconsidered their positions on territorial disputes involving humans. Enemy species began to wonder if they had seriously underestimated this peculiar little species that had somehow turned a public execution into a masterpiece of strategic misdirection. The execution amphitheaters on Korthak Prime were quietly converted to cultural centers and educational facilities. The commemorative sculpture garden was redesigned as a memorial to victims of strategic overconfidence. The media division responsible for the execution broadcast was reassigned to managing agricultural reports, which was considered more appropriate to their demonstrated level of competence. In the end, the Vaeltharan Dominion learned several valuable lessons about the dangers of underestimating opponents, the importance of verifying intelligence before acting on it, and the inadvisable nature of turning military executions into entertainment spectacles. The humans, for their part, learned that sometimes the best way to win a war is to let your enemy provide you with exactly the distraction you need. The galaxy, meanwhile, learned that humans were considerably more dangerous when people stopped paying attention to them than when they were being observed by trillions of beings across thousands of worlds. It was a lesson that proved remarkably difficult to forget, especially for the former Chancellor Korthane, who spent his forced retirement writing philosophical treatises on the nature of strategic hubris and wondering how 3 retired civilians had managed to outmaneuver the greatest military minds of his generation. The title of his most famous work was How I Accidentally Gave the Humans Their Greatest Victory, a study in strategic self-defeat. It became required reading at military academies throughout the galaxy, though probably not for the reasons he had originally intended.